Are we even ready for guitar channels to be doing videos in places other than bedroom studios or living rooms? Oh, I am, for sure. So, let's begin one. Welcome to Norway, where the air is thick with spruce pollen and national pride. It's Norway Day tomorrow, and the whole place is very, very excited for it. Firstly, thanks for all the discussion in the comments sections of the Tonex videos that I've made. It's been really interesting, and I have learnt quite a bit actually. The fact that we can now make dual amp stereo rigs with tiny pedal boards for like hardly any money is mega important and super interesting. And it's opening up a whole world of discussions about phase and latency and polarity. So firstly, used in the normal way in a mono signal path, if you just use it as a stomp box or use it as an amp, you will not notice any latency. 1.5 or less milliseconds of latency is like the least latency you can possibly imagine. You will not be able to tell. There was somebody who said they could tell the difference between 2 and 3 milliseconds latency, that 2 was they could feel it and 3 was borderline unusable. What planet are you from? How is that even possible? That's the distance between having your amp 2 feet from you and 3 feet from you. I don't believe you. I just don't believe you. You are welcome. If you live in the UK, come to my studio. We will do a blind test and we'll put the results in a video, because I just don't believe that a human being can tell the difference between 2 milliseconds and 3 milliseconds. The only time you'll ever hear a phase difference like that, and that is the crux of the issue with the Tonex and with every other profiler. I cannot stress that strongly enough. Every other profiler or modeler. The only time you'll ever notice a millisecond or two is when the profiles is when you're using them in parallel, using 2 at the same time. So you're biamping or something similar. Which brings me nicely on to this next point. If you mic up a guitar amp to capture a profile, you mic it up with a microphone an inch from the cone. You then have another microphone that's 6 inches back. Those will not be perfectly in phase, those 2 profiles. If you run them in parallel, they will not, through identical hardware, they will not be perfectly in phase. They'll be 0.5 or 0.6 milliseconds out of phase with one another. That is the phase relationship between those 2 microphones on that cabinet. Now picture this. Some amps invert the polarity. You would never know. You would never notice it if you didn't, if you weren't experimenting with biamping. But some amps invert polarities and some pedals do. There's a whole world of compressor pedals, distortions, modulations, delays. It doesn't matter about the latency or lack of latency with the profile player, i.e. the Tonex 1, the Tonex, Kemper player, Quad Cortex, whatever. It could be 0.0 milliseconds and it will still be out of phase because the profile itself is out of phase. It's an issue in analog studios. That's why you have those polarity buttons on each channel. Like that's part of music. It's never really been so easily accessible and affordable for musicians to have 2 separate bits of hardware, and it's the Wild West now, isn't it? We can have any mic, any amp, any cabinet, and in any polarity. It's an issue like it would be anywhere else in the music world. So it's nothing to do with Tonex particularly. I know I did a video about it, but don't get caught up with latency as the thing that's causing the phase issues. Oh yeah, the TRS output on the Tonex 1. Genius. I didn't even think about this, but obviously you can use the TRS, use a Y lead, Y cable, and that can split your amp sound, and then you can go to your delay and reverb, your stereo delay and reverb, even stereo modulation. Why did I not think of this? I thought you'd need to have 2 Tonexes of the same profile, but you don't. You just use the TRS output, left and a Y cable, and then you're in stereo, so it can serve as a stereo splitter. This is great, isn't it? Right? This is a really useful thing that no one's talking about. It's handy. Anyway, getting some funny looks from the locals, so as you were, or as wet dry. So you go out of your one Tonex, left is dry, that goes to your main speaker and to the front of house. Right goes off into effects. It could even be going to something like the Flint or something that splits it into two. Then it goes into stereo delays. So you could then send those three lines. So you'd have a mono dry signal and then a wet, then two lines of stereo delay going to the PA, and you could have a mix in your ears and you could have a mix out front that would be different. Why have I not thought of this before? Let's try and summarize this whole thing. The profiles made with any of these polarity inverting amps or pedals will not be in phase with profiles that are in phase. And the difference that latency makes is just another variable. So when you think about all the profiles you might want to combine, and I'll say this again, this only applies if you're using two profiles simultaneously and in parallel. The following things can affect how they combine. Does one of the profiles have inverted polarity because the amp inverts polarity? Is there a pedal in the chain that affects polarity? There's a long list of pedals that do this. What distance was the microphone from the speaker when the profile was captured? And was there anything else in the signal chain when the profile was made? Other digital pedals, latency or time delay in the rig that captured the profile? So unless you're doing your own capturing and making your own profiles and you have full control over this stuff, there's no way of knowing exactly what kind of timing shifts and phase shifts there might be when you're combining these profiles. So additional latency of a few milliseconds or fractions of milliseconds is just one of many things to think about. It comes down to using your ears. It comes down to trying it and seeing if it works, just as it would if you were using the real stuff. It's just a lot easier. You might want some sort of polarity inverter on your board. That might be something that would be useful to... Oh my God, look at this sky here. I'll get out of the way. Absolutely epic. Some sort of polarity inverter might be helpful. Maybe that's a feature that they can include. I know the Quad Cortex gives you the option to invert one part of the signal chain. So maybe that would be an option. But there's a lot to think about, isn't there?